Greetings, everyone. GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we had Thrall beat 8 out of 9 rounds in the arena, then just got brutalized by an ogre, and then brutalized by his owner, Blackmore, and some homies that Thrall's lost caused to lose money. Just let a bunch of dudes come in and gang kick him in the face. So stay a while and listen to this one. It's chapter 6. Thrall has now determined he's getting out. He's getting out of Dodge. Let's see if that happens in this episode or if he just starts putting things in motion. Excuse me. The grate above his head allowed Thrall to observe the moon's light. He was careful to give no hint, not to the trainees who had beaten him, not to Sergeant, and certainly not to Blackmore, who treated Thrall as if nothing had happened about his profound revelation. He was as obsequious as ever, for the first time noticing how he hated himself for that behavior. He kept his eyes lowered, although he knew himself to be the equal of any human. He went docilely into the irons, though he could have torn any 4 guards to bloody bits before they could have restrained him without his cooperation. In no way did he change his behavior, not in the cell nor out of it, not in the ring nor on the training field. For the first day or two, Thrall noticed Sergeant watching him sharply, as if expecting to see changes Thrall was determined not to show, but he did not speak to Thrall, and Thrall was careful not to arouse suspicion, let them think they had broken him. His only regret was that he would not be present to see the look on Blackmore's face when he discovered his pet orc had flown. For the first time in his life, Thrall had something to look forward to, with anticipation. It roused a hunger in him he had never known before. He had always concentrated so intensely on avoiding beatings and earning praise that he had never permitted himself to really think long and hard about what it meant to be free, to walk in the sunlight without chains, to sleep under the stars. He had never been outside at night in his life. What would that be like? His imagination, fueled by books and by letters from Tari, was finally allowed to fly. He lay awake in his straw bed, wondering what it would be like to finally meet one of his people. He had read, of course, all the information the humans had on the vile green monsters from the blackest demon pits, and there was that disturbing incident when the orc had wrenched himself free to charge Thrall. If only he could have found out what the orc was saying, but his rudimentary orcish did not extend that far. Yeah, that's going to be something that has to happen. He's going to have to learn how to speak their language. He would learn one day what that orc had said. He would find his people. Thrall might have been raised by humans, but little enough had been done to win his love and loyalty. He was grateful to Sergeant and Tari, for they had taught him concepts of honor and kindness. But because of their teachings, Thrall better understood Blackmore and realized that the Lieutenant General had none of those qualities. And as long as Thrall was owned by him, the orc would never receive them in his own life. The moons, one large and silver and one smaller and a shade of blue-green, were new tonight. Tari had responded to his declaration with an offer to assist him, as he had known in his heart she would. Between the two of them, they had been able to come up with a plan that had a strong likelihood of working, but he did not know when that plan would go into effect, and so he awaited for the signal, and waited. He had fallen into a fitful slumber when the clanging of a bell startled him awake. Instantly alert, he went to the farthest wall of his cell. Over the years, Thrall had painstakingly worked a single loose stone, and had hollowed out the space behind it. It was here that he stored his most precious things, his letters from Tari. Now he moved the stone, found the letters, and wrapped them up in the only other thing that meant anything to him, his swaddling cloth with the white wolf against the blue field. For a brief moment he held them to his chest, then he turned and awaited his chance. The bell continued to ring, and now shouts and screams joined it. Thrall's sensitive nose, much more keen than a human's, could smell smoke. The smell grew stronger with each heartbeat, and now he could see a faint orange and yellow lightning of the darkness of his cell. "Fire!" came the cries. "Fire!" Not knowing why, Thrall leaped for his makeshift bed. He closed his eyes and feigned sleep, forcing his rapid breathing to become deep and slow. "He's not going anywhere," said one of the guards. Thrall knew he was being watched. He kept up the illusion of deep sleep. "That monster can sleep through anything. Come on, let's give him a hand." I don't know," said the other one. More cries of alarm mixed now with the treble shrieks of children and the high voices of women. "It's spreading," said the first one. "Come on!" Thrall heard the sounds of boots striking hard stone. The sounds receded. He was alone. He rose and stood in front of the huge wooden door. Of course, it was still locked, but there was no one to see what he was about to do. Thrall took a deep breath and with a rush of speed charged the door, striking it with its left shoulder. It gave, but not entirely. Again he struck, and again. 5 times he had to slam his enormous body against it before the old timbers surrendered with a crash. The momentum carried him forward and he landed heavily on the floor, but the brief pain was as nothing compared to the surge of excitement he experienced. He knew these hallways. He had no problem seeing in the dim light provided by the few torches positioned in sconces that were fastened here and there to the stone walls. Down this one, up this stairwell, and then, as it had earlier in his cell, a deep instinct kicked in. He flattened himself against the wall, hiding his huge form in the shadows as best he could. From across the entryway, several more guards charged. They did not see him, and Thrall let his held breath out in a sigh of relief. The guards left the door to the courtyard wide open. Cautiously, Thrall approached and peered out. All was chaos. The barns were almost completely engulfed by flames, though the horses, goats, and donkeys ran panic-stricken in the courtyard. This was even better, for there was less chance of him being spotted in the milling madness. A bucket chain had been formed, and even as Thrall watched, several more men hastened up, spilling the precious water in their heedless rush. Thrall looked to the right of the courtyard gate entrance. Lying in a crumpled pool of black was the object he was seeking. A huge black cloak. Even as large as it was, it could not possibly cover him, but it would serve. He covered his head and broad chest, crouched so that the short hem would fall lower on his legs, and scurried forward. The trip across the courtyard to the main gates could not have lasted more than a few moments, but to Thrall it seemed an eternity. He tried to keep his head low, but he had to look up frequently in order to avoid being run down by a cart carrying barrels of rainwater, or a maddened horse, or a screaming child. His heart pounding, he threaded his way amid the chaos. He could feel the heat, and the bright light of the fire lit up the entire scene almost as brightly as the sun did. Thrall concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, keeping as low as possible and heading for the gates. Finally he made it. These too had been thrown open. More carts carrying rain barrels clattered through, the drivers having a hard time controlling their frightened mounts. No one noticed one lone figure slipping out into the darkness. Once clear of the fortress, Thrall ran. He headed straight for the surrounding forested hills, leaving the road as soon as possible. His senses seemed sharper than they had ever been. Unfamiliar scents filled his flaring nostrils, and it felt as if he could sense every rock, every blade of grass beneath his running feet. There was a rock formation that Taratha had told him about. She said it looked a bit like a dragon standing guard over the forest. It was very dark, but Thrall's excellent night vision could make out a jut that, if one used one's imagination, could indeed appear to be the long neck of a reptilian creature. There was a cave here, Taratha said. He would be safe. For the briefest moment he wondered if Taratha might not be setting a trap for him. At once he dismissed the idea, both angry and ashamed that it had even occurred to him. Taratha had been nothing but kind to him via her supportive letters. Why would she betray him? And more to the point, why go to such great lengths when simply showing his letters to Blackmore would accomplish the same thing? There it was, a dark oval against the gray face of the stone. Thrall was not even breathing heavily as he altered his course and trotted for the refuge. I'm thinking back to this dungeon and how the fires are set. It goes obviously a little bit differently, but you can see some of the parallels between that instance and this chapter. He could see her inside, leaning against the cave wall, waiting for him. For a moment he paused, knowing that his vision was superior to hers. Even though she was within and he without, she could not see him. Thrall had only human values by which to measure beauty, and he could tell that by those standards Taratha Foxton was lovely. Long, pale hair. It was too dark for him to see the exact color, but he had glimpsed her momentarily in the stands at the matches from time to time. Fell in a long braid down her back. She was clad only in night clothes, a cloak wrapped close about her slender frame, and beside her was a large sack. He paused for a moment, and then strode boldly up to her. "Taratha," he said, his voice deep and gruff. She gasped and looked up at him. He thought her afraid, but then she laughed. "You startled me. I did not know you moved so quietly." The laughter faded, settled into a smile. She strode forward and reached out both hands to him. Slowly, Thrall folded them in his own. The small white hands disappeared in his green ones, nearly 3 times as large. Taratha barely reached his elbow, yet there was no fear on her face, only pleasure. "I could kill you where you stand," he said, wondering what perverse emotion was making him say those words. "No witnesses that way." Her smile only grew. "Of course you could," she acknowledged, her voice warm and melodious. "But you won't." How do you know? Because I know you. He opened his hands and released her. Did you have any trouble? None, he said. The plan worked well. There was so much chaos that I think an entire village of orcs could have escaped. I noticed that you released the animals before setting fire to the barn. She grinned again. Her nose turned up slightly, making her look younger than her, 20? 25 years? Of course, they're just innocent creatures. I'd never want to see them harmed. Now we had best hurry. She looked down at Durnholde, at the smoke and flames still billowing up into the starry sky. They seem to be getting control of it. You'll be missed soon. An emotion Thrall didn't understand shadowed her face for a moment. As will I. She took the sack and brought it out into the open. Sit. I want to show you something. Obediently, he sat down. Tari rummaged through the sack and withdrew a scroll. Unrolling it, she held it down on one side and gestured that he do the same. It's a map, said Thrall. Yes, the most accurate one I could find. Here's Durnholde, said Taratha, pointing at a drawing of a small castle-like building. We are slightly to the southwest, right here. The internment camps are all within a 20-mile radius of Durnholde. Here, and here. She pointed at a drawing so small even Thrall couldn't quite make them out in the poor light. Your best chance for safety is to go here into the wilderness area. I've heard that there are still some of your people hiding out there. But Blackmore's men are never able to find them. Just traces. She looked up at him. You'll somehow need to find them, Thrall. Get them to help you. Your people, Taratha had said, not the orcs, or those things, or those monsters. Gratitude suddenly welled up inside him so powerfully that for a moment he couldn't speak. Finally he managed, Why are you doing this? Why do you want to help me? She looked at him steadily, not flinching from what she saw. Because I remember you when you were a baby. You were like a little brother to me. When Paladin died soon afterward, you were the only little brother I had anymore. I saw what they did to you and I hated it. I wanted to help you, be your friend. Now she looked away. And I've no more fondness for our master than you do. Has he hurt you? The outrage that Thrall felt surprised him. No, not really. One hand went to the other wrist, massaged it gently. Beneath the sleeve, Thrall could see the fading shadow of a bruise. Not physically, it's more complicated than that. Tell me. Thrall, time is... Tell me, he boomed. You have been my friend, Taratha. For over 10 years you have written me, made me smile. I knew someone knew who I really was, not just some monster in the gladiator ring. You were a light in the darkness. With all the gentleness he could muster, he reached out and placed his hand oh so lightly on her shoulder. Tell me, he urged again, his voice soft. Her eyes grew shiny as he watched liquid spilled from them and poured down her cheeks. I'm so ashamed, she whispered. What is happening to your eyes? Asked Thrall. What is ashamed? Oh, Thrall, she said, her voice thick. She wiped at her eyes. These are called tears. They come when we are so sad, so soul sick. It's as if our hearts are so full of pain there's no place else for it to go. Taratha took a shuddering breath. And shame. It's when you've done something that's so contrary to who you believe yourself to be. You wish that no one ever knew about it. But everyone knows, so you might as well too. I am Blackmore's mistress. What does that mean? She regarded him sadly. You are so innocent, Thrall. So pure. But someday you will understand. Suddenly Thrall recalled snippets of bragging conversations he had overheard on the training field and understood what Taratha meant. But he did not feel shame for her, only outrage that Blackmore had stooped even lower than Thrall had guessed he could. He understood what it was to be helpless before Blackmore, and Taratha was so small and fragile she couldn't even fight. Come with me, he urged. I cannot. What he would do to my family if I fled. No. She reached out impulsively and gripped his hands. But you can. Please, go now. I will rest the easier knowing that you at least have escaped him. Be free for the both of us. He nodded, unable to speak. He had known he would miss her, but now having actually conversed with Tari, the pain of their parting cut even more deeply. She wiped her face again and spoke in a steadier voice. I've packed this full of food and put in several full water skins as well. I was able to steal a knife for you. I didn't dare take anything else that might be missed. Finally, I want you to have this. She bowed her head and removed a silver chain from her long neck. Dangling from the delicate chain was a crescent moon. I think that's also an image in like a little JPEG or whatever that they use for moves. Not far from here there is an old tree that was split by lightning. Blackmore gives me leave to wander here when I wish. For that at least I'm grateful. If you are ever here and in need, place this necklace in the trunk of the old tree, and I will again meet you in this cave, and do what I can to help you. Die. Thrall looked at her miserably. Harry. She cast an anxious glance back at Durnholde. I've made up a story to excuse my absence, but it will go easier for me the sooner I return. They rose and looked at one another awkwardly. Before Thrall realized what had happened, Tari had stepped forward and stretched her arms about his massive torso as far as they would reach, her face pressed against his stomach. Thrall tensed. All such contact hitherto had been as an attack, but although he had never been touched in this way before, he knew it was a sign of affection. Following his instincts, he tentatively patted her head and stroked her hair. They call you a monster, she said, her voice thick again as she stepped away from him. But they're the monsters, not you. Farewell, Thrall. Taratha turned away, lifted her skirts, and began to run back toward Durnholde. Thrall stood and watched her until she had disappeared from view. Then, with the utmost care, he placed the precious silver necklace in his bundle and stashed it in the sack. He lifted the heavy sack, it must have been very difficult for Taratha to carry it so far, and slung it over his back. Then Thrall, the former slave, began to stride to his destiny. All right, so we've got a little foreshadowing there, Writers, and Christy Golden, I would give her some chops. She's a pretty good writer. A writer doesn't introduce a plot device if they don't plan on using it, so that he is going to leave that necklace in that trunk to try and get her attention. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It's probably going to be tied in some way to the tragedy that we know awaits. All right, we have this episode in the pipe, 5x5. We're about a third of the way done with this novel. I thank everybody so much for watching, for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.